My son handed me a letter across our kitchen table and told me to read it carefully. It was not a birthday card. Not a note. A legal-looking document. My name printed at the top. A signature line at the bottom left. Empty. Waiting for me like a trap someone had polished for months. My daughter-in-law stood by the window with her arms folded, watching me the way a person watches an elevator door. Impatient. Already certain of where it would go. My son cleared his throat and said, "Mom, we need you to transfer the house into our names. It is the only way we can refinance and clear the debt. You do not have to move. You just have to sign." He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed until the words stopped feeling cruel. I was 67 years old. I had lived in that house for 31 years. I had painted every room twice, buried a dog in the backyard, and held my husband's hand in the bedroom down the hall until he stopped breathing. That house was not a piece of real estate. It was the shape of my entire adult life, and my son was asking me to sign it away over a cup of coffee that was already going cold. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the document for a long moment and said I needed time to think. My daughter-in-law made a sound that was not quite a laugh and said, "There is nothing to think about. This is family helping family." She said the word family the way people say it when they mean obligation. My son looked at me with something I can only describe as managed disappointment. The look of a man who had expected resistance but had decided in advance not to respect it. "Mom," he said, "you are not using the house for anything. You are just living here. This makes more sense. Just living here." I thought about that phrase for a long time after they left the room. People always want to know why I did not throw them out immediately. It is a fair question. I have asked it myself in the years since. The honest answer is that I needed them to go far enough that the truth would be unmistakable, not just to me, but to everyone. I had spent years being described as difficult, controlling, a woman who could not let her son live his own life. I needed what happened next to speak for itself, clearly and permanently, with no room for reinterpretation. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand what they walked into, you have to understand what they thought they were walking into. My son had always been the kind of person who confused love with access. When he was young, it looked like charm. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel chosen, included, seen. It was a gift, and for a long time I was proud of it. What I did not understand until much later was that beneath the warmth there was a calculation, a constant measuring of what each person in his life could provide, and what it would cost him to keep them close. He was 34 when he married. I had concerns not about her as a person exactly, but about the speed of things, the way they moved into decisions, the way people run toward exits. I said what I thought once carefully, and he looked at me the way he always looked at me when I failed to simply agree. He said, "You never trust anyone I choose." I let it go because I had learned that pushing only sent him further in the direction he was already headed. My daughter-in-law arrived in my life carrying a confidence that left no space for anyone else's. She had opinions about everything and delivered them like verdicts. When she and my son moved in with me temporarily after a lease fell through, I told myself it would be 3 months. That was 2 years before the morning with the document. In those 2 years, the house changed in ways I could feel, but not always name. My things were moved without being asked. Furniture I had chosen with my husband was described as outdated, then offered to donation centers. My daughter-in-law redecorated the living room while I was visiting a friend for a weekend and presented it as a gift. My son smiled and said, "Do you love it?" I said it was different. He said I should be more grateful. I started to understand the architecture of what was happening. This was not carelessness. It was rehearsal. The debt was real. At least that part was true. My son had invested in a business with a friend, a restaurant that closed inside of 18 months. The amount they owed was around $180,000. A serious sum. A sum that had consequences. I understood that. What I could not understand was why the consequences needed to be paid with my house. I asked that question once directly. My daughter-in-law answered before my son could. She said, "Because you have the asset and we have the need. That is how families work." She said it slowly, as if explaining something simple to someone who was struggling to keep up. That night, I called my friend Eleanor. the woman who had sat beside me at my husband's funeral and held my hand through the whole service without saying a word. Eleanor had known me for 40 years and had the particular gift of listening without interrupting. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Robert was my husband. He had died 4 years earlier. Quietly the way he had lived, without drama, without complaint, with his affairs more carefully arranged than most people arranged their sock drawers. He had been a methodical man, a man who believed that love expressed itself through preparation. He left me the house." I said, "No." Eleanor said, "I mean, what else? You know what I am talking about?" I did know. I had just been avoiding it. Robert had spent the last year of his life meeting with our attorney, a man named Gerald, who had handled our family's legal matters since we bought the house decades ago. Robert had not told me everything he was doing in those meetings. He said only that he was making sure I would be protected, that certain arrangements would activate if they were ever needed, and that I should call Gerald if things became complicated with the house. I had never called. I had told myself things were not complicated enough. I had told myself my son loved me underneath all of it. I had told myself I was overreacting. I called Gerald the morning after my son showed me the document. Gerald answered on the second ring. When I told him what had happened, he said, "Come in this week. Bring anything they have given you to sign and any messages related to the property." His voice was calm in the way voices are calm when they are backed by something solid. I said I would. Then I put the phone down and walked into the kitchen to make breakfast, and I felt for the first time in months like the floor beneath me was exactly where it was supposed to be. They did not know I had called anyone. They believed I was processing, which to them meant softening. My daughter-in-law began treating the house with a new ease and accelerated ownership. She moved her clothing into the larger closet without asking. My son started talking about renovations, a new deck, an updated kitchen, projects that assumed a future in which my name was no longer attached to any of it. One afternoon, I came home from my weekly errands to find a man with a clipboard standing in my backyard. My daughter-in-law introduced him as a contractor. She said they were just getting estimates, just planning ahead. It was nothing serious. The man handed me a quote printed on company letterhead with my son's name listed as the property owner. I folded the paper and put it in my coat pocket without speaking. That evening, my son came to find me in the small sitting room where I kept my books and my sewing basket and a framed photograph of Robert taken the summer before he got sick. He sat across from me and said, "Mom, I need you to understand that we are trying to build something here. You are either part of that or you are in the way of it." He said it gently, which made it worse somehow. Gentle cruelty always did. I asked him what he meant by in the way. He looked at the window for a moment and said, "There are other options for you. Smaller places, senior communities, places designed for people at your stage of life." He paused. "You would not have to manage all of this alone. My stage of life." I looked at the photograph of Robert on the shelf behind my son's head. Robert, who had measured the door frames when we moved in. Robert, who had taught my son to ride a bicycle in this driveway and cheered louder than anyone at his college graduation. Robert, who had spent the last year of his life making sure no one could do exactly this. "I needed a few more days," I said. My son nodded as if granting a small favor. "Do not take too long," he said. "We have people waiting on us." I met with Gerald 3 days later. His office smelled like old wood and organized paper, a smell I had always associated with trustworthiness. He laid out what Robert had done across several years of quiet, careful meetings. Robert had restructured the house under a revocable living trust. The trust had specific protective clauses built in, language that Robert had insisted on and Gerald had drafted with precision. If I, as the sole trustee, were ever subjected to coercion, undue pressure, or any attempt to force or manipulate me into transferring property rights, ownership of the home would automatically pass to a housing nonprofit that served elderly women experiencing financial exploitation. The clause required documentation of the attempt, which could include written communications, recorded messages, or signed witness testimony. Gerald slid a notepad across the desk and asked me to tell him everything I remembered: dates, statements, the contractor in the backyard, the document my son had given me to sign. All of it. He was quiet and thorough and made no expressions of surprise or outrage. He simply wrote. When I finished, he looked up and said, "Do you have the document they asked you to sign?" I had brought it. I handed it to him and he read it without hurrying. "They drafted this themselves," he said. Yes. That was not wise of them. He told me that the document, combined with the messages my son had sent asking me to sign and transfer, combined with the contractor quote, listing my son as owner, was sufficient. The trust clause had been triggered the moment my son presented the document and made clear that my continued presence in the house depended on my compliance. I sat there in the chair across from Gerald's desk and felt something move through me that I did not have a name for, immediately. It was not triumph. It was not even relief exactly. It was more like recognition. The feeling of seeing something you had been told was not there, confirmed at last, in plain language, in a document with your name on it. Gerald said he would file the relevant notices that week. I went home and made dinner. I did not tell my son or my daughter-in-law anything. I set the table for 3, the way I always did, and listened to my daughter-in-law describe plans for a kitchen island, while my son agreed with everything she said. I was present and quiet. And they interpreted my quiet the way they always did, as compliance, as a woman running out of resistance. They were wrong about the quiet. They had always been wrong about the quiet. The notification arrived by certified mail on a Thursday morning. My son signed for it without knowing what it was. I watched from the hallway as he opened the envelope, and I watched the moment his face changed. It is a particular kind of stillness that comes over people when they read something that reorganizes their entire understanding of a situation. He read the letter once, then again, then looked up at me. "What is this?" he said. It was not a question. It had the sound of something collapsing, I said. "It is the answer to the question you should have asked before you handed me that document." My daughter-in-law came in from the other room and took the letter from him. I watched her read it. Her expression moved through several stages quickly, confusion, then calculation, then something that looked close to fear. "This cannot be valid," she said. "You set this up. You tricked us." I said, "I did not set up anything. My husband did 4 years ago because he knew his son." She said there had to be a way to contest it, that she would get her own lawyer, that this was manipulation. My son stood very still and said nothing. I think some part of him already understood. I said, "The house will go to the foundation at the end of 30 days. Gerald will be in touch about the timeline." I picked up my coffee cup and walked back to my sitting room. They spent the next 2 days loud and then suddenly quiet. My daughter-in-law made calls in the bedroom with the door closed. My son moved through the house with the particular days of someone who had been very certain about something and is now uncertain about everything. He knocked on my sitting room door on the second evening and stood in the doorway looking at the floor. "Did you always know?" he said. I thought about the question. "I always knew your father was careful," I said. "I did not know how careful until I needed to." He said, "Mom, and then stopped. I waited, but nothing followed. I said, "I know you are in real trouble with the debt. That is true and it is serious. But the answer was never my house. And somewhere underneath all of this, I think you know that he did not apologize. I did not expect him to, not that night. But he closed the door gently when he left. And there was something in the gentleness that told me the calculation had shifted, that I was no longer a problem to be solved, but a person who had simply told the truth about what the problem was. They moved out on a Sunday. I helped carry nothing and stopped nothing. My daughter-in-law packed with efficient fury, each box taped and stacked with the energy of someone who needed movement to avoid feeling. My son carried things to the car in silence. Before she left, my daughter-in-law stopped in the hallway and looked at me and said, "I hope you are satisfied." She meant it as an insult. It landed as a simple factual question. "I am at peace," I said. "That is not the same thing, but it is enough." The house was quiet that evening in a way it had not been in 2 years. Not empty quiet, not sad quiet, the particular quiet of a place that has been returned to itself. I made dinner for one and ate it at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard where the contractor had stood with his clipboard. And the yard looked like mine again. Just the old apple tree Robert had planted, the bird feeder I filled every Sunday, the faded wooden fence we had painted together the summer before our son was born. Gerald called me the following week. The foundation had acknowledged the filing. The transfer timeline was set. I asked him to pass along my thanks to Robert somehow, if that was something that could be done through legal channels. He said that was slightly outside his area of expertise, but that he would note it in the file. I laughed for the first time in what felt like a very long time. My son called me 6 weeks later. He had found a small apartment. He and his wife were working through the debt with a consolidation plan. His voice on the phone was different. Quieter. Stripped of the management tone he had used with me for years. He did not ask for anything. He said he had been thinking about his father, about what his father had actually done in those last months, and that it had taken him a long time to understand it correctly. I asked him what he understood. Now, he said. He did not set a trap. He built a wall because he loved you. I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, the apple tree was moving slightly in the wind. The same tree that had been there for 30 years, that had survived 2 ice storms and a drought, and decades of seasons. Some things hold if you tend them right. Yes, I said, that is exactly what he did. I did not offer to solve his debt. I did not invite him back. I said that I hoped things would improve and that I was here if he ever wanted to talk. Not about money or property or paperwork, just to talk. He said, "Okay." It was a small okay, uncertain, like the first word of a longer sentence that had not yet decided its own ending. We said goodbye, and I hung up and sat with the quiet for a while. Eleanor came for dinner that Friday. She brought a bottle of the wine we always opened for things worth acknowledging. Not celebrations exactly. Just moments that deserved to be recognized. We ate at the kitchen table, and she asked me how I felt, and I tried to find the right word for a while before I gave up on precision. Like myself, I finally said. She raised her glass, and that was enough. I have thought a lot since then about what my husband understood that I did not, at least not fully, not until I needed to. He understood that love without limits is not love. It is a door left open for people to walk through carrying whatever they decide they are owed. He understood that protecting yourself from the people who claim to love you is not a betrayal of that love. It is sometimes the most honest thing you can do. He also understood something about me specifically, that I would endure too long before I acted, that I would give the benefit of the doubt past the point where doubt had any honest business living. And so he built something that did not require me to be braver than I was. He built something that activated on its own quietly the moment it was needed, like a light that comes on when the room goes dark. I am 67 years old. I live alone in a house I have loved for 31 years. In the mornings, I drink my coffee by the window, fill the bird feeder, and sometimes talk to Robert's photograph. The way people who have loved someone for a long time talk to the spaces those people used to occupy. I tell him he was right to worry. I tell him his plan worked perfectly. I tell him I am okay. The debt my son carried was real, and I did not solve it for him. Some people who hear this story think that is the harshest part. I think it is the kindest. I did not fix it because fixing it would have told him that the consequences of his choices were something I would always absorb. That my love had no end to what it would swallow. That is not love. That is a lesson that would have followed him the rest of his life. The hardest thing I ever did was nothing. Standing still while someone tried to take everything from me, and choosing not to explain myself, not to argue, not to beg, just standing still and letting the thing my husband built do what he had built it to do. Some people call that strategy. Some people call it wisdom. I call it the one gift my husband gave me that I almost did not accept. I am still here. The apple tree is still here. The bird feeder needs filling every Sunday without fail. There are worse ways to spend a life than tending the things that matter and holding your ground quietly for exactly as long as it takes. If there is a woman listening to this who is being told she is too much, too old, too sentimental, too attached to things she should simply let go of, I want her to hear something. The people who tell you that you are holding on too tight are usually the ones trying to pry your hands open. Your grip is not the problem. What you are protecting is worth protecting, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing, while everything you have quietly prepared does exactly what it was always meant to do. My name is Dorothy. This is my story, and I am still here to tell it.